Now, after the second introductory talk, we're going to go on to hear the testimony offered us by the architect Giuseppe Ingaglio, Joseph Ingaglio, called the cultural heritage of the province of the Capuchin Friars Minor of Siracusa. It's a project of the Capuchin province. Over to you. I thank the organizers for having chosen this talk. The spread of Capuchin monasteries in Sicily is currently organized as a legacy of previous centuries into three religious provinces, Palermo, Messina, and Syracuse. These follow the historical subdivision of the island itself into three valleys, Val di Mazzara, Val Demone, Val di Noto, this last of which embraces the whole of southeastern Sicily, including the coast from Catania to Gela and inland roughly as far as Enna. The latter includes the province of Syracuse, where 8 of the 38 friaries founded over the centuries are still active. The closure of various friaries has led to the securing of the cultural heritage, which, despite these various suppressions, in many cases, fortunately, remained the property of the religious. The superiors who succeeded one another in governing the province maintained this heritage according to the specific types of artifacts and respecting the provenance, themes, repertoires, and, last but not least, the use and function of these assets themselves. Thus, 3 collections were created: the bibliographic and archival heritage, which was transferred to the provincial cura in Syracuse, while the artistic heritage was collected in Caltagirone. Here, the full availability of the very large rooms in the Caltagirone friary, made available by the religious, allowed the deposit of artifacts, which were organized in the 1970s for a usable exhibition and, in any case, maintaining the memory of their provenance. You were talking about the traceability of these objects. We didn't, well, this was by chance I have made this reference. I prefer to use the term memory because the operations of transferring the works of art were often carried out without documentary evidence and with a dynamic that could be defined as instinctive and spontaneous, due almost exclusively to the personal enthusiasm of Father Antonino Nestler, who over the decades, also with the acquiescence of his superiors and the competent superintendency, governance of the order, was able to collect these goods, avoiding their dispersion and ensuring their preservation. Sorry to the translators, especially for my Italian colleagues. Sicily, being a region, an autonomous region, in some areas we have some particular norms that are different, and this concerns cultural heritage. So if the Sicilian Parliament doesn't accept what the Italian Parliament has said, it doesn't get put into practice. That's what I've understood him saying. But in some cases, we're not part of Italy. So it's opportune to note that the collection of artifacts on the premises of the Capuchin Friary in Caltagirone was steadily increased in recent years due to the further closure of friaries and consequently the necessary securing, keeping safely these works of art. The choice of Caltagirone, moreover, was and still is motivated both by the tourist attraction of the city itself, known for its artistic and highly skilled ceramic production, as well as for its significant cultural heritage. In the newspapers, the paper said that there's more people went there than to other places. So the choice of Caltagirone, apart from all that's been said before, but also by the presence of the tomb of Father Innocenzo Marcinò, a native of Caltagirone and general minister of the Capuchin Friars in the 17th century, declared venerable in 2009 by Pope Benedict. In 2014, the current exhibition was set up, organized exclusively by the type of artifact. Organized exclusively by the type of artifact, setting aside the original context and thematic itineraries and giving priority above all to the aspect of a usable storage space and aesthetic visual pleasure. On this occasion, the museum was named after Innocenzo Marcinò. These characteristics above mentioned are one of the limitations of this situation. The exhibition layout is organized according to a typological criterion of the exhibits, disregarding chronologies and origins and above all the cultural contexts that produce them and their liturgical worship and devotional use, and therefore without any pastoral implication as expressed in the circular letter on the pastoral function of ecclesiastical museums. Without any pastoral implications, as expressed in the circular letter on the pastoral function of ecclesial museums, drawn up in 2001 by the Pontifical Commission for the Cultural Heritage of the Church. An example of this is the arrangement of the corpus of leather frontals, which are lined up in two rows, one on top of the other, on the walls of a large corridor, without any reference to the use and specific characteristics of this production of painted leather, which constitute, among other things, a very particular, but not exclusive, tradition of the Capuchins of southeastern Sicily. Similarly, the paintings and sculptures are distributed in the rooms almost as if they were furnishing a room. In addition, unlike the provincial archives and library, where the bibliographic and archival patrimony from the various monasteries of the province has come together, as mentioned above, and for which the respective indexes have been compiled, at the Museum of the Province in Caltagirone there is no catalogue or systematic repertory, except for some partial form of a more or less coherent inventory. And there's not even a deed or similar document attesting to the establishment of the museum itself. All of this, including the management, was and currently remains in the condition of spontaneity, which, being slightly daring, could be defined as that of an amateur collector. This unfortunately happens all too often in small ecclesial realities, and perhaps even in those that are not so small. And examples are not lacking of parish religious houses and confraternal collections with the presumption of describing as a museum or treasure a single room in which are exhibited some mirabilia found in drawers and cupboards. I'm talking about the Sicilian situation, but I think that this is actually quite common, and others have this ancient Greek vase has already been mentioned, and some of the things are exhibited and they find their way into a present shop, and it's the spinster's treasures but never used. But despite this situation, the commitment, zeal, and tenacity of Father Antonio Nestler's good faith and generosity, who's over 90 now, have made all this work effective in preserving and maintaining this heritage. The present governance of the Capuchin province of Siracusa, from the moment it took office, took into consideration the need to become aware of the heritage of the museum and to seize the opportunity of its potential, both pastorally and culturally, and why not, also in terms of employment possibilities of this resource. Thus began reflection on how to proceed, and therefore a dialogue with the person speaking to you now in order to be able to sketch out the project that has been proposed here, whose drafting has been accelerated now to a more definite stage thanks to this conference. The project is waiting to be implemented. This paper presents the project in its various stages and the current state of the art. The first and most important step is the recognition of the artifacts, those on display and in storage, in order to make an inventory that is scientifically coherent and compliant with specific cataloging systems for cultural assets of religious interest, taking into account their provenance, type, their possible use for worship and devotion, iconographic themes, and the commissioning of the artifacts. It was agreed to use the Italian Bishops' Conference software and system for the computerized inventory of historical and artistic ecclesial assets made available to the religious institutes by the National Office for Ecclesial Cultural Assets and Worship Buildings, both because it is known and used by the professionals and is by those using it. And I'm very familiar with it too, and also to take advantage of the related assistance that comes with it. The indications and information that will be acquired during the compilation phase of the files, of these file cards, of these notes, are more important as regards the provenance and commissioning of the assets, as well as identifying the authors and the context in which these works were created. This information forms the basis for the next stage of the process, which involves studying and reordering these objects in order to present them in a more relevant, appropriate way, both in terms of the underlying causes that produce them and in terms of a process of self-understanding of the specific Capuchin religious charism within the community itself and, where possible, within the communities of origin, which often coincide with the area in which they were produced. It's well known, as is the case for other religious families, that the friars often dedicated themselves to the production of objects for worship and devotion in the same friaries where they resided, not only to satisfy the internal needs of the community, but also for the outside world. Not infrequently, this activity had very highly qualified, skilled results, testifying to the cultural and artistic professionalism of those who made them, among whom in Sicily and Val di Noto there are many outstanding figures. There's a Dominican, the Capuchin, Father Fedele, Fra Felice. While staying in the Capuchin province, Father Angelo Gagliano. From the framing of the origin and from the identification of the origin and the author, it is possible to construct thematic itineraries, not only iconographic, aimed, not least, also at the formative proposal, both within the Capuchin community and those of Sicily and specifically the province of Siracusa, and externally in relation to the civil community and the church community. Although now these further phases of the project have not yet been fully defined, there is awareness that among the aims of these further phases, we must bear in mind that the public can be encouraged by means of appropriate tools to follow different paths, with the possibility of further personalizing of the options, depending on whether it's a question of church groups or organized visitors or individual visitors. In any case, a section dedicated to Father Innocenzo Marcinò will be included. His tomb is in the church beside the friary. It will be included in the exhibition itinerary, as will the hall itself, which is rich in important and significant works. But the religious community, lots of people still go to that church. Finally, the project will be completed by a proposed program of specific events and exhibitions, as well as contemporary art initiatives, including an opening towards artistic ceramic production typical of the city of Caltagirone. These initiatives are also aimed, like the whole project, at a greater and more coherent understanding and interpretation of the cultural heritage of the province of the Capuchin Friars Minor of Syracuse and the presence of their charism in the territory, in the area. But this now concerns the eventual development of the project and the future management of the museum, and we're full of hope for all that awaits us. Thank you.